Let's have a brief review first. I will conduct such tests on those all-new cameras for filming. Firstly, check the image quality. Maybe I will skip this process if the camera can shoot RAW. If the camera is shooting with compressed codec, I will check its image quality by comparing it with a RAW photo. Then I will know if I have to enhance the sharpness of the image. Secondly, I will find out the usable ISO, although it may have been provided by the manufacturer. After that, I will see how is the dynamic range and how the distribution is. Then I will find out the latitude. For example, this GH5s can achieve a +3 and -4 range. Latitude is very important, which helps us decide on exposure. Finally, I will check if there is any color tinting for the white balance. Of course, you can correct it in post-production, but I prefer to fix it before filming in order to simplify the post-work. At last, I will assign the most important functions to different custom buttons. As I mentioned before, I will assign the C1 for daylight vlog L, C2 for tungsten, and C3 for slow motion. And that's all my preparation for this GH5s before the actual filming. Then let's see what are the equipment I've used in this movie. The first one was this Metabones 0.64 times speed booster. I just got one Metabones, and for the big camera, I used the aperture's lens regain. The advantage of using a speed booster is, firstly, it expands the M4 field at least to APS-C or Super 35 format. For the GH5s, if you use this 0.64 times speed booster and film it with 17:9, the crop factor will then be changed to 1.2. It will be larger than the APS-H format and almost the same as the full frame. Secondly, it can help you to get a better shadow depth of field. I will say that the shadow depth of field is not always necessary. Still, I will try the best to control the depth of field. For dramatic purpose, at certain moments, you will need a very short depth of field, and indeed, it's really not so easy to achieve a short depth of field effect with the original M4 field sensor. On the other hand, a crew member told me that he has a Viltrox speed booster. The Viltrox is not 0.64 times and gets only 0.72 times. It's still a bit wider than the aperture's 0.75 time. But I didn't intend to use it. People will worry about that if these speed boosters have any bad effects. I've enlarged the check and found no defects on the image. The out of center area may not be as sharp, but I think it's not so important. However, the biggest problem is, well, let me open and see. You will find a large lens here, and once the maximum aperture of your lens is opened, there will be direct light hitting your sensor. Thus, it will easily produce internal flares that a halo will appear in the center of your image. Metabones can control this problem well and has no effect on the image. Aperture is not as good as the Metabones. Later, I found that the Viltrox would be a little bit worse. Perhaps this is why there are price differences between these products. Then we come to the lens. I used Samyang products, which is called Rokinon in the North America. In fact, this is just a different name under the same brand made in Korea. I used the Cine series, but not the Cine lens of the Cine Pro series. All these lenses can cover full frame size sensor. Yes, including 14mm, 24, the 50 and 85. And you can see that only the 50mm and the 85mm share a similar size and shape. 24mm is different. So they are not perfect cinema lenses. As I said before in the episode of Blackmagic, a well-designed cinema lens set should have the same body shape, size, and even weight, so that there is no need to adjust the position of the accessories when changing the lens. Still, they get another advantage that they are all T-stop lenses. Just a brief explanation here that f-stops is only a reference value. However, the T-stops is a true aperture. Once it tells you it is T2, the transmission then must be T2. Frankly speaking, T-stop lenses are more important in the film era, and especially for those zoom lenses. But for digital shooting nowadays, T-stop lenses are really not that important. And regarding the results, there may be only slight difference between the T-stop lenses and the f-stop lenses. However, T-stop lenses still represent higher requirements and stricter quality assurance. Then you may ask, is it really okay to use such relatively cheaper lenses for movie making? And what is the difference compared with those expensive lenses? I want to talk about the standards for verifying the quality of a lens first. First of all, the most important, of course, is the sharpness of the lens. But of course, there are other factors that affect clarity. For example, what is the performance when it exceeds the center area? But for me, I don't really care about the performance of the out of the center area or the corners. The reason is that sometimes I intentionally blur or defocus the area out of the center. But of course, there's nothing wrong with requiring a completely sharp lens, especially for different types of working requirements. For example, if I want to take large landscape photos, I will also request a completely sharp lens. But I will say that the Samyang lenses also have very good sharpness and quality. Secondly, if there is any chromatic aberration. But I will say that if there is indeed any chromatic aberration or color tinting, it can also be corrected in post-production. Thirdly, it comes to the issue of distortion. Actually, the distortion is well controlled in the 2D aspect. Even with this 14mm wide-angle lens, the lines look very straight without distortion. But I always ask, are there other distortions besides the 2D distortion? I would say that with regard to moving images, all wide-angle lenses have perspective or depth distortion. When an object approaches the lens, it will deform in a barrel shape. For movie lenses, we pay more attention to this issue of perspective distortion. For example, when an actor is really close to the lens, does the shape of the actor become strange? I just said that in the end, I really don't mind if there is some distortion, but I will concern how far I can accept in actual filming. At last, the quality of a lens is also determined by its resisting power of flares. My experience tells me that the higher-priced products will have better anti-flare capabilities. I have tried. Even if you irradiate those expensive lenses with direct light, there were no flares, just a small beam of light, and no effect on image quality. I would say that this is the main difference between cheap and expensive lenses. Indeed, I would say that Samyang has done a good job of resisting flares. Maybe it is not as good as those more expensive lenses. The result is really not bad. Then we come to this variable ND filter. I really think this is an innovative good product. In the past, we could only place the ND filters piece by piece with different levels. For example, ND3 for -1 stop, ND6 for 2, ND9 for 3, and combine together for many stops, and it is very troublesome. Variable ND is very simple, that you only need to rotate the filter, and I think many people are using them now. You may ask, why did I keep using these filters in the movie? The reason was I want to fully utilize the maximum aperture of those fast lenses, and to create a better shadow depth of field. It's also an artistic approach, especially for certain static shots. I can control the depth of field better. Variable ND can help me shoot more conveniently and quickly. Then again, are there any defects over the image? My answer is no. It has no effects on the clarity of the image. The only effect is it will be more difficult to resist flares, especially those with direct light. I think maybe this is the price paid for this convenience. But again, if you really like flares, you must add this filter since it can help you to create flares effects more easily. In the previous episode, I have said that one of the advantages of using mirrorless cameras for shooting is that I can then use a smaller sized gimbal. I used the DJI's Rolling X gimbal in this movie. In fact, I don't have any special requirements for these gimbals. Seems to me, they will not have a big performance difference. And the most important thing is that they are easy to use and set up. Here, I want to talk about my ways of shooting gimbal shots. I said before that a combination of variable ND and large aperture lenses is used to create images with shallow depth of field. But whenever I use the gimbal, I will stop down the iris to f8 or f11 in order to get a longer depth of field. First, if you are already in large format to shoot action scenes with fast lens, your image will easily out of focus. And on the other hand, since the actors are already in action, there is a separation between the background and the actors already. And thus, a shallow depth of field will not be a must for separation. By the way, it's also an artistic approach. For certain scenes, I want the actors to fall into the chaos of the urban environment. If the background is blurred, the effect may not be so good. And maybe this is a compromise with the shallow depth of field effect. But sometimes we have to think about it while shooting. Keep the progress over time. Therefore, whenever I film it with gimbal, I use a wider lens. Not extreme wide, most of the times is 24mm, but keep the aperture of f11. In this way, I can keep the progress. Another very important equipment in this film, the drone. I used a DJI Mavic 2 Pro. Why not use the Inspire? Sure, I agree that the Inspire is a premium drone with good image quality. But the Mavic 2 Pro is also equipped with a very good spec. It shoots 10-bit 422 and also has locked color profile. I remember that I didn't test the Mavic 2 Pro before. However, I never thought of investing in an Inspire, since the Inspire is quite expensive, and in this movie, the ratio of drone footages is not so much. But for sure, if you are going to be a drone service provider or expert, then buying an Inspire is certainly a good idea. I own a Mavic Air and found that the image quality is not bad. The Mavic Air gets a 1/2.3-inch CMOS sensor. The only defect is that the noise can sometimes be a bit high. I'm familiar with the performance of Mavic 2 Pro's 20MP 1-inch CMOS sensor. That's the same as the Sony RX100 series or the Lumix ZS110 or FZ1000. And since it's equipped with 10-bit 422 and locked color profile, there won't be difficulty in matching its color with other cameras. And it turns out the result is pretty good. For the convenience of work, I suggest that you must purchase this smart controller. Then you don't need to connect your phone. Just turn on the drone and the controller. You may start filming quickly. The display of the controller is very bright and beautiful. I will conclude that the Mavic 2 Pro is a very good equipment for filmmaking. Finally, there's an equipment that you may not see its performance in the movie, but that's very important to me, the light meter. The one I use in the movie is not this one. That's also iconic, the L508. It can measure both incident and reflected light. Why do I insist on using a light meter, especially in this era of digital filming? What you see, what you get. Plus, there is waveform monitor to help you for exposure. Does the light meter still help? My answer is absolutely yes. Once you really understand the dynamic range and the latitude of your camera, you then know the comfort window for exposure. And if you encounter a very high contrast scene, you don't need to look through the camera to make any decision on exposure. I can use my light meter to learn the contrast ratio, so I will know what aperture to use. The light meter is also important when setting up lightings. You can precisely control the light through the light meter. No need to look through the camera, because that would be too inefficient and slow. In the film's era, I've met a cinematographer who always carried a small leather case with him every day. What's inside? 3 light meters, and one of them looks very old. And you can see that he really cares about his tools. Put them gently into the case after measurement. All the cinematographers loved their light meter very much in the past. This is because we didn't have any previews at that time. After shooting, you can only see the effect after printing from the labs. The light meter plays a very important role in deciding the aperture. I have developed this habit since shooting film in the past. Of course, you can apply other methods for exposure. I think it is not a matter of right or wrong, but for me, I prefer using a light meter because it can improve efficiency.
打埋波我唔打啦，我要翻工喎。你翻咩工啊？喂，先生，有冇點啊？
佢而家好多嘢都唔記得，連屋企都唔識翻啦。
當年我哋都好慘咯
，20幾年前嘅事啦，我哋一家人嚟㗎，佢係你老豆啊，我唔想你後悔啊！
你翻嚟啦，阿妹，好掛住你啊，老婆。
黐線㗎！
老婆。我老婆啊，阿妹啊，
我係佢個女啊！你好，你好，你好。
我老婆翻嚟啊！
我係佢個女啊！
我上樓上睇啲嘢啊！
嗰陣時我哋影落嗰啲相唔見晒嘅。
你有冇咩願望啊？
好多，不過驚希望越大，失望越大。
夜啦，瞓啦。
等埋阿妹先啦。
咁我陪你。
可他怕來做被窩。
我揾錢好辛苦㗎，我唔可以亂咁嘥嗰啲錢㗎。
阿爸，我咪你個女咯，音樂啊。
家姐，
我見翻佢嘅時候，當時我同你一樣，好嬲佢。
你唔好怪阿強啦！
你哋唔好再叫我原諒佢啦，好唔好啊？我憎咗佢20年，最後佢竟然乜都唔記得。
阿妹啊，唔開心啊，成日嚟呢度㗎。寫早餐未啊？我煮俾你食啊。阿妹，你去邊啊？你做乜唔留住佢啫？佢走咗就唔會翻嚟㗎啦。
佢唔記得晒曾經傷害過我哋3母女，連我所有嘢都記得清清楚楚。
10幾年前見你喺度喊，10幾年後你又喺度。
衰咗大晒啊！阿媽已經死咗10年㗎啦。乜你以為一隻蛋一塊麵包就可以當乜事都冇發生過？你記唔記得當日你嘅細女攬住你隻腳啊？咁係你唔好走，唔好走，你有冇聽到啊？
可唔可以聽我講一次啊？我怕我好快會唔記得，都唔記得。